So have you ever felt that the task in front of you is just an impossible task? That there's no way that we could accomplish what we know needs to be done in the time that we have with the tools at our disposal? Maybe God is asking something of us and we question what we think He's asking us to do. How often do we feel like giving up or not even starting to begin with? I imagine that's how the disciples felt when they saw the vast crowd and they thought they needed to send them away. The thought of trying to feed everyone with what they had at their disposal was just too immense. Now, Jesus wanted nothing more than to be by himself. And he just learned about the death of John the Baptist, and he wanted to go mourn that death. So he goes out in a boat to an area far from towns and villages, far from anyone. And we know this because the gospel said he went to a deserted place, not the desert, but a place as far as away that he could be to be alone. But the people needed Jesus, and they followed him, so that when he returned to the shore, they were waiting for him. Instead of putting his own needs first, his heart was moved, and he began to cure their sick. This is our God, who cares for us and provides for us if we only seek him out. I think this is further reflected by what he tells the disciples to do. It was getting late, and the disciples felt helpless. Contrast that with how Jesus was feeling. And they tried to remind Jesus that this is a deserted place and we should dismiss the people so they can find food, for it was getting late. Send them away, they imply. But how does Jesus respond? There is no need for them to go away. Give them some food yourselves. Now we have the impossible task. For all they had was 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. For a crowd that probably had to be somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000. The gospel tells us 5,000 men, not counting women and children. But if you include all the women and children, they had to be at least double that size. And I doubt that the loaves were that large and the fish were that big. They weren't state records. Imagine standing on the 50-yard line of Eagle Stadium, looking up at the home side crowd, both decks filled with people seeking Christ. All the seats are filled. That's probably around 10,000 people. Imagine standing there looking up, and how are we going to feed all these people with what we have? 5 loaves and 2 fish. I know there's a Kroger nearby, but we don't have time to run over to Kroger. And besides, they don't have enough for 10,000 people either. How could Jesus even suggest that we feed them? Impossible. But Christ knew what he was about to do, and so he did as they commanded. Bring them to me. The disciples trusted Jesus, and so they brought the 5 loaves and the 2 fish to him. And what happens next should be so familiar to us. He took the offering, looking up to heaven, said the blessing, broke the bread, and gave it back to the disciples. The disciples then in turn distributed the food to the crowd. These are the same words used what happened at the Last Supper and what happens at every Mass when the priest says the Eucharistic prayers. And where did the miracle happen in this gospel? Did Jesus multiply the loaves, and did he give baskets and baskets of food back to the disciples? Or they were being multiplied while they were distributing them? The gospel is really silent in this. However, we know that the disciples trusted and listened to Jesus and did what they were told to do, and they accomplished an impossible task. The disciples did the work, but could not do it without Jesus. Is there an impossible task in your life right now? Maybe reconciling with a estranged family member or friend. Perhaps wanting to get out of a desperate situation at work, or desiring a new career, or just trying to find a job. Wondering how to care for an elderly parent or a sick family member? Have we lost a loved one recently and we just do not know how we can go on? How to balance caring for the family while tending to all the work around the house, while working, and then trying to figure out how to do the kids' virtual learning for the beginning of the school year and still take care of ourselves. And for those of you in school, having to learn from home and not being driven insane by your parents. Believe me, I understand as I watch my own grandchildren at home trying to do their virtual learning. Maybe God is calling us to something new, but we resist because we find something to be impossible right now. How do we handle the impossible task, the impossible situation we find ourselves in right now? We trust and take the impossible to Jesus. We read in the first reading, "All you are thirsty, come to the water, come receive grain and eat." So I ask, why do we continue to direct our efforts to those things that really aren't satisfying us? The reading further goes on, "Heed me and you shall eat well. Listen that you might have life." When we feel overwhelmed, anxious, worried, confused, thinking that we can't go forward, we need to bring our gifts to Jesus. Let his heart be moved by our pleas and allow him to work in our lives. So what impossible task do we have in front of us? We need to search him out, find him. And as we approach the altar to receive the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist in a few minutes, bring your impossible task with you. Leave it here at the altar. And then fill yourself with real food that strengthens and satisfies. For Christ will guide you through the impossible task.